People always think the worst thing about coming home to your lake cabin is finding a broken window or muddy footprints. They never imagine walking in and realizing someone else has already decided they belong there. The first thing I noticed wasn't the lights. It was the smell. Lemon cleaner. Fresh coffee. Something floral floating in the air that absolutely did not belong in a cabin that had been locked for 3 weeks. I killed the engine of my dark blue F-150 and sat there for a second listening to the evening settle over the lake. Water tapped softly against the dock. Wind moved through the pines with that low whisper that always reminded me why I kept this place. My cabin wasn't luxury. It wasn't some millionaire lake house with glass walls and infinity pools. It was cedar siding, old stone, and 30 years of family history sitting on 4 quiet acres outside a private HOA lake community in northern Michigan. My dad bought the place back when interest rates were brutal and lake property was still something regular people could dream about. Every summer growing up, this place smelled like sunscreen, black coffee, and wet life jackets. After he passed, I kept it exactly the way he left it. Same old tackle box. Same faded canoe hanging in the rafters. Same coffee mug with a chip in the handle. I work patrol in the county now. Long shifts. Too many calls. Too many people yelling at each other over things that didn't matter. This cabin was where I came to remember most problems weren't permanent. I wasn't supposed to be here that Thursday. I traded shifts and drove up early because weather reports called for rain and I wanted one quiet night by the water. As I came down the gravel drive, something felt wrong before I understood why. My porch light was on. I never left it on. Then I noticed my front door wasn't fully closed. Not broken. Not kicked in. Just slightly open. The kind of open that says someone expects to come back. I parked without turning on my headlights. Walked slowly, boots crunching over gravel. The closer I got, the more details started stacking up. Fresh tire marks. 2 vehicles. One of them had left narrow luxury SUV tread. The porch had a plastic folder sitting on the chair. My chair. Big bold letters across the front. Community Compliance Review. I picked it up. My address. My cabin. No signature. No authorization. Just HOA letterhead. Through the screen door, I heard voices. One woman. Confident. Talking loudly in that strange tone people use when they want to sound official. Then another voice answering quietly. I stepped onto the porch and looked through the front window. A woman in white slacks and a cream blazer stood in my living room holding a clipboard. Around 50. Blonde. Perfect posture. 2 younger people stood behind her taking pictures. She pointed at my bookshelf. Then my fireplace. Then toward my kitchen. Document everything, she said. Possible unauthorized use. We'll determine compliance status later. I didn't move. I just watched. Because there's a moment you learn to respect in my line of work. The moment before people realize they've crossed a line. That moment tells you more than anything afterward. The woman walked over to my father's old framed fishing photo and tilted it. She opened a cabinet, checked inside, walked into the hallway, like she owned the place. One of the younger workers asked quietly, "Did the owner approve this?" She smiled without even looking up. Inspection rights. Residents never read the bylaws. I felt my jaw tighten. Not anger exactly. Something colder. Because I knew enough already. No emergency. No visible damage. No legal notice posted. No authority. Just confidence. The dangerous kind. The kind that assumes nobody will ask questions. She came back into the living room, carrying my guest logbook. My father's handwriting still inside. She flipped pages and said, "Interesting. We may need copies." That's when I opened the door. Every head turned. Nobody screamed. Nobody panicked. The woman looked annoyed more than surprised. Like I'd interrupted a meeting. She looked me up and down. Boots. Flannel. Ball cap. Then she smiled politely and said, "Can I help you?" I looked around my own cabin. At my father's photo. At the clipboard. At the strangers standing on my floor. Then I smiled back and said, "Actually, I was about to ask you the same thing." She had absolutely no idea who I was. And I wasn't going to tell her. Not yet. The woman held my gaze for exactly 2 seconds before deciding what kind of person she thought I was. You can tell when people do that. They look at your truck, your boots, your clothes, and they file you into a category. Harmless. Busy. Too polite to push back. She smiled again, that professional neighborhood smile with nothing warm behind it. "You must be Ethan," she said, like she had practiced saying my name before meeting me. "Victoria Caldwell." president of Lakewood Shores Community Association. We have been attempting to reach you regarding several concerns. She said concerns the way people say contamination. I set my keys on the kitchen counter and looked around the room. One worker lowered his camera immediately. The other kept holding a tablet like he was waiting for instructions. Victoria stood completely at ease in the middle of my cabin. No apology. No explanation. Just ownership. I nodded slowly. Interesting way to reach someone. She ignored that. As outlined under community compliance standards, seasonal properties are subject to inspection if there are indications of neglect or unauthorized use. Her voice had that polished confidence people get when nobody has challenged them in a long time. I looked at the folder in my hand. No signature. No county notice. No posted entry authorization. I already knew enough not to argue immediately. People explain more when they think they are winning. I leaned against the counter and said, "Neglect?" Victoria gave me a sympathetic look that somehow felt insulting. Your neighbors have expressed concerns. Irregular occupancy. No visible maintenance schedule. Questions regarding short-term usage. I almost laughed. This place had been in my family longer than most of the homes in this development existed. But I kept my face neutral. That cabin was never about appearances. My father built routines into it. Every spring we pressure washed the dock. Every Memorial Day we opened the shutters. Every Labor Day we covered the boat and stacked firewood under the lean-to. When I was 10 years old, Dad made me sand the same bench twice because I rushed through it. He used to say people reveal who they are by how they treat things that do not talk back. Houses, tools, land. I still hear his voice every time I unlock the place. That was part of why I kept coming back even after becoming a police officer. People think the job changes you because of danger or stress. It does not. It changes you because after enough years of noise, conflict, and emergency calls, silence starts feeling expensive. I had been with the county sheriff department for 13 years. Work patrol, community response, property cases. The kind of work where you learn two important things. Most people are decent. And the people who are not usually tell on themselves if you stay quiet long enough. The cabin became my reset button. No radio traffic. No reports. No fluorescent lights. Just cold mornings, lake water, black coffee, and enough space to remember who I was outside the badge. Nobody in Lakewood Shores knew my job. I never advertised it. My mailbox said Mercer. That was enough. I paid my dues on time, attended exactly one HOA meeting in 5 years, and generally stayed invisible. Apparently, that invisibility had created its own problem. Victoria stepped closer and opened her clipboard. We documented several items requiring follow-up. Storage concerns, unregistered equipment, questions regarding interior conditions. Interior conditions. I repeated that in my head because the wording bothered me. Interior, not exterior. She said it casually, like entering somebody's house to evaluate bookshelves and coffee mugs was normal. My eyes drifted toward the old fishing photo she had moved earlier. Dad holding a smallmouth bass, smiling into afternoon sun. I straightened the frame without saying anything. Victoria noticed. Her smile tightened slightly. Then she said something that finally made me understand what this was really about. Seasonal owners sometimes forget communities evolve. Shared standards protect everyone. Shared standards. Not safety. Not damage. Control. That phrase landed in my chest, and suddenly I understood the open door. The inspection forms. The confidence. This was not random. This had happened before. She looked around my cabin like she had already decided what belonged there and what did not. Then she closed her clipboard and said, "We should probably discuss next steps." I smiled back, because for the first time since opening that front door, I realized I was no longer surprised. I was curious. Victoria did not sit down. People like her never sit in someone else's house unless they want to communicate ownership. She stayed standing in the center of my living room holding that clipboard against her chest like it was a badge. One of the younger workers shifted awkwardly and lowered his eyes. The other quietly stopped taking photos. Funny thing about authority. Real authority makes people calmer. Fake authority makes everyone nervous. Victoria gave a small laugh and looked around the room. You know, most owners appreciate us helping maintain standards. Her eyes moved across the shelves, the old canoe paddle over the fireplace, the stack of county maps near my desk. Seasonal properties can become unpredictable. I nodded once. Unpredictable how? She smiled again. Neglect. Liability. Unauthorized gatherings. People underestimate how quickly lake communities decline. There it was again. Not concern. Control disguised as concern. I had met that tone before. Not here. On calls. Property disputes. Neighborhood complaints. People who wanted rules because rules felt cleaner than talking to other human beings. Victoria walked over to the window facing the dock and folded her arms. When I became president, this community had no direction. She said president the way some people say founder. People parked wherever they wanted. Cabins sat empty. Docks looked inconsistent. Property values suffered. I stayed quiet. She took that as permission to continue. Now everything is organized. One of the workers nodded automatically. She noticed and seemed encouraged. Uniform landscaping. Appearance reviews. Seasonal occupancy monitoring. Seasonal occupancy monitoring. That phrase landed strangely. Not because of the words. Because of how casually she said them. Like watching people's homes was normal. I asked, monitoring. She turned toward me immediately. Only for community integrity. Community integrity. Another polished phrase. I had heard enough interviews over the years to know when people hide actions behind broad language. You ask direct questions. They answer with slogans. Victoria stepped toward the hallway and pointed with her pen. For example, owners who are absent too long tend to lose awareness of neighborhood expectations. I looked at the hallway she had already walked through. My hallway. Then I asked the question casually. How long is too long? She did not hesitate. Depends. That answer told me more than any policy document could. Depends means whoever is in charge decides. I noticed one of the workers glance at her before looking away. Little things matter. People reveal systems accidentally. Victoria continued talking while flipping pages on her clipboard. Apparently, she had opinions about everything. Boat colors. Exterior lighting. Dock furniture. She mentioned one family that moved because they could not keep up with compliance expectations. Another owner who sold after repeated disputes. She spoke about these people the way someone talks about replacing furniture. Efficient. Necessary. Then she stopped on a page and looked up at me. Actually, your cabin has come up more than once. I raised an eyebrow. Really? She nodded. You are difficult to reach. That almost made me smile. I lived 45 minutes away. My address was current. My email worked. My dues auto-paid. Difficult to reach usually means difficult to influence. She tapped the clipboard. People notice things. Long periods away. No participation. Private usage. Private usage. I looked around my own cabin and suddenly something clicked into place. This was never about maintenance. This place bothered her because she could not integrate it into the system she built. My dock stayed simple. My yard was natural. I skipped social events. I did not ask permission to exist. She looked directly at me and said, communities work best when everyone is visible. I remembered something my father used to say while repairing old motors in the garage. Be careful around people who confuse attention with importance. The room felt smaller somehow. Evening light reflected off the lake and painted soft movement across the wood floor. Victoria adjusted her blazer sleeve and smiled one more time. Anyway, this inspection is mostly procedural. Procedural. That word echoed in my head. Because somewhere between her entering my cabin, opening cabinets, photographing private property, and explaining how invisible owners become problems, I realized something uncomfortable. She believed every word she was saying. This was not a scam to her. This was normal. And people who think they are helping usually push farther than people who know they are wrong. Victoria set the clipboard on my dining table without asking. That tiny sound of hard plastic touching old wood bothered me more than it should have. That table was handmade. My father built it one winter after deciding store furniture was overpriced and characterless. I still remembered standing beside him at 12 years old while sawdust floated through cold air and country radio crackled from the garage shelf. And now a stranger had placed paperwork across it like she was processing inventory. She slid a form toward me. This is simply acknowledgement that inspection occurred and corrective recommendations may follow. I looked down. Community compliance visit. Owner present. That part almost made me laugh because 5 minutes earlier nobody expected me to be there. I picked up the paper. There was a section listing observations. Seasonal underutilization. Interior storage concerns. Dock condition review pending. Potential community access evaluation. I read that line twice. Community access evaluation. I looked up. What does that mean? Victoria answered immediately like she had rehearsed it. Nothing serious. Some lake owners voluntarily participate in shared access programs for underused properties. Voluntarily. Another interesting word. I set the paper down. And who decides what underused means? She smiled again, but it landed colder this time. There are indicators. I nodded slowly. Like. She folded her arms. Frequency of visits. Community involvement. Occupancy patterns. Occupancy patterns. I looked around my own cabin again and started noticing things I had missed walking in. My curtains were tied differently. One window had been opened. A chair near the dock door was moved 6 inches. Tiny details. Nothing stolen. Nothing damaged. Just signs somebody had been comfortable. Too comfortable. One of the younger workers quietly said, "Victoria." She gave him a look and he stopped talking immediately. Interesting. I walked to the sink and poured myself a glass of water. The faucet hissed and the old pipes clicked softly behind the walls. Familiar sounds. Grounding sounds. I took a sip and asked casually, "How many inspections have you done?" She looked pleased by the question. "Quite a few. Residents appreciate active leadership." I nodded. "And people usually let you inside?" Her answer came too fast. "People who support the community do." That one stayed in the air for a second. Support the community. Meaning disagreeing became suspicious. I had heard that logic before. Not in neighborhoods. Everywhere. Good people become quiet because they think pushing back makes them difficult. Victoria opened her folder and pulled out another document. This one had highlighted sections. She tapped a paragraph with perfect manicured nails. Association authority to preserve standards. I read it. Exterior maintenance. Shared areas. Visibility requirements. Nothing about entering homes. Nothing about photographing interiors. Nothing about inspecting personal property. I handed it back. Interesting interpretation. Her smile thinned slightly. Interpretation evolves. That sentence hit me harder than she intended. Interpretation evolves. Meaning boundaries move if nobody stops them. I walked to the bookshelf and adjusted one of the books she had shifted earlier. My fingers brushed old lake maps and fishing journals. Dad's handwriting again. Dates going back 20 years. I suddenly pictured someone else standing here while I was working late shifts or covering holidays. Opening drawers. Looking around. Deciding what counted as proper use. The thought sat wrong in my chest. Victoria noticed my silence and softened her voice. "You seem protective." I looked at her. "I am." She nodded sympathetically. That is common with inherited properties. Emotional attachment can make owners resistant to modernization. There it was. Not property. Not law. Emotion. She had already decided I was sentimental and irrational. Easier to manage that way. Then she reached into the folder and slid over one final page. Community participation opportunity. Optional cabin access review pilot program. Weekly check-ins. Shared use recommendations. My eyes stopped at one line. Seasonal occupancy optimization initiative. I looked up slowly. Victoria smiled proudly. Some cabins are simply too valuable to sit empty. And that was the exact moment I realized this had never been about inspections at all. I looked at the paper for another second and then set it back on the table carefully. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just deliberate. Victoria watched me the way people watch someone they assume is about to become emotional. She was waiting for the reaction. Waiting for the raised voice so she could become reasonable by comparison. I stayed calm. So let me make sure I understand. I tapped the page once. If someone does not use their private property the way the community prefers, there is a process to encourage more community use. Her smile returned immediately. That is an oversimplification, which usually means yes. I nodded. How many people joined voluntarily? She adjusted the papers. Enough. Not a number. I walked toward the back door and looked out over the lake. The evening had shifted darker now. Water moved in slow lines across the surface. A pontoon drifted in the distance. Somewhere farther down the shoreline, somebody closed a screen door. Normal sounds. Meanwhile, inside my cabin, somebody was explaining why ownership needed supervision. I turned back. "Can I ask one more question?" Victoria smiled. "Of course." I pointed gently toward the hallway. "When you came in today, who unlocked the door?" She did not answer immediately. Interesting. Then she smiled again. Association access procedures. Not an answer. One of the workers looked at the floor. I noticed. Victoria continued. Emergency compliance access. Another broad phrase. I nodded once and acted like that explained everything. And what emergency was happening? That pause got longer. She flipped a page she did not need to flip. Potential property deterioration. I looked around the room. Clean counters. No damage. Freshly maintained wood. Dock visible through the window. Looks serious. She ignored that. Then she did something I was not expecting. She stepped closer and lowered her voice slightly. Mr. Mercer, I can tell you care about this place. But I think you are viewing this emotionally instead of practically. There it was again. Emotion versus practicality. She continued before I could answer. People inherit things and sometimes struggle to adapt. Cabins become symbols instead of assets. Assets. I almost smiled. This place was where my father taught me how to tie fishing knots and change brake pads and sit quietly when there was nothing to fix. Asset was not the word I would use. Victoria kept going. Communities thrive when resources are active. Resources. Not homes. Not memories. Resources. I realized she had stopped seeing houses as places a long time ago. To her they were units. Inputs. Outputs. Participation rates. I looked at the folder again and noticed something clipped behind the participation form. Another sheet. Color-coded. Addresses. Property status labels. Green. Yellow. Red. My cabin address had a yellow mark beside it. I pointed. What is that? She reacted too quickly and slid the page under the stack. Internal tracking. I nodded slowly. Internal tracking. That phrase sat badly. She noticed my expression and smiled. Nothing concerning. I asked lightly, how many yellow properties become community access candidates? Her smile disappeared for half a second. Tiny thing. Easy to miss. Then she recovered. That is not really relevant. Which means very relevant. I leaned against the counter and took another sip of water. Cool. Metallic. Familiar. I looked at the workers. Young. Uncomfortable. Not enjoying this. One of them had HOA logo embroidery on his shirt, but kept avoiding eye contact. I had seen that look before too. People doing something because someone told them it was normal. Victoria gathered her papers. Anyway, this does not need to become adversarial. Adversarial. Another interesting word. Nobody had argued. Nobody raised a voice. Yet somehow she already imagined opposition. She handed me the acknowledgement form again and held out a pen. If you sign this, we can move forward collaboratively. I looked at the pen, then at the form, then at her. I smiled politely and slid both back across the table. I think I need time to review what exactly happened here today. Her expression stayed pleasant, but something changed behind her eyes. Not anger. Disappointment. Like a teacher realizing a student was not cooperating. She picked up the paperwork slowly and said, of course. Just understand delays can trigger additional review. Additional review. I nodded. Good to know. She gave one final smile and said, we usually find people become more cooperative after follow-up. And for the first time all evening, something cold settled quietly into place in my chest. Because that did not sound like a process. It sounded like experience. Victoria collected her papers with careful movements. No rushed gestures. No irritation. Just the calm efficiency of somebody who had done this enough times to assume the ending already belonged to her. The workers packed their tablet and camera equipment and headed toward the front door. Before stepping outside, she turned and gave me one last smile. You will receive a follow-up notice within 5 business days. Then she added quietly, almost casually, I would not wait too long. The front door closed. Silence came back in layers. First the lake, then the wind in the trees, then the refrigerator hum. I stood still for a few seconds and looked around the cabin. Same room, same furniture, completely different feeling. It is strange how quickly a familiar place can stop feeling private. I walked through slowly. Living room, kitchen, hallway, guest room. Nothing damaged, nothing missing, which somehow made it worse. Whoever came in here had not acted like intruders. They acted like managers. I stopped in front of the bookshelf and noticed one book was upside down. County Water Access Maps. Nobody except my father and me ever touched that shelf. I fixed it and kept walking. In the hallway bathroom, the hand towel was folded differently. Guest room window unlocked. Bedroom closet slightly open. Tiny things. Normal things. Except they were not normal because they were not mine. I opened the back door and stepped onto the deck. Cool evening air hit my face. The lake smelled like cedar and cold water. Usually that smell reset my head. Not this time. My eyes drifted toward the corner under the roofline. Small black dome camera. Installed 3 years ago after a string of dock thefts around the county. Motion activated. Local storage. No cloud subscription. Nothing fancy. I stared at it for a second. Then I looked at the camera over the garage. Then the one facing the driveway. A habit from work. Layers. Always layers. I went inside and opened the utility cabinet where the recorder sat. Small gray box. Status light blinking. Still running. I crouched down and checked timestamps. Last motion event. Today. Multiple recordings. I sat there quietly listening to the soft click of the hard drive spinning. Suddenly, I remembered something else. 6 months ago at an HOA meeting I attended for exactly 28 minutes, Victoria made a comment during open discussion. She said communities fail when people disappear. At the time I thought she meant social events. Looking back now, maybe she meant something else. I opened the recordings and started scanning. Not watching, just checking patterns. Driveway activity. Door activity. Duration. 3 visits in the last 2 weeks. 3. My hand stopped moving. Today was not the first inspection. The first recorded visit happened on a Wednesday at 11:23 in the morning. White SUV. Victoria. 1 worker. Stayed 18 minutes. Second visit. 5 days later. Same vehicle. 34 minutes. Today was the longest. I sat back slowly. Nobody forced entry. Nobody broke windows. They walked up confidently. Used the front door. Entered. Moved around. Left. Like routine. My stomach did not drop. It got quiet. That feeling you get when puzzle pieces stop being random. I opened one clip and muted the sound. Victoria is standing in my living room holding papers. Pointing. Looking around. One worker writing notes. Then she walked to the bookshelf. Opened cabinets. Checked drawers. Nothing dramatic. Just certainty. I skipped ahead. She stopped near the dining table and held up a page to the worker. He nodded. She pointed at the wall where family photos hung. Then she wrote something. I zoomed in. Too blurry to read. I checked another clip. She brought someone different. This time 2 women. Walking through slowly. One of them gestured toward the lake and smiled. Not inspecting. Looking. I froze the frame. Community participation opportunity. That phrase came back into my head. Seasonal occupancy optimization. Shared access. Underused property. Suddenly those words did not sound theoretical anymore. I closed the laptop and sat in silence. Water tapped against the dock outside. Somewhere down the shoreline somebody started a fire pit, and the faint smell of wood smoke drifted across the lake. My father used to say if somebody acts like something belongs to them before asking, they probably practiced believing it first. I looked at the dark screen in front of me and realized this story had started long before I came home. That night, I did not turn on the television. I did not start a fire. I did not even unpack my overnight bag. I sat at the dining table with my father's old lamp casting that warm yellow circle across the wood and watched recordings. Not because I expected some dramatic reveal. Experience teaches you most important things never look dramatic. They look ordinary until you notice the pattern. Midnight came quietly. Wind moved across the lake. The cabin creaked the same way it always had when temperatures dropped. I opened a notebook and started writing times. Dates. Duration. Vehicles. Number of people. First visit 18 minutes. Second visit 34. Third visit today. Then I wrote something else. Nobody carried tools. Nobody checked utilities. Nobody inspected structures. They looked. They pointed. They discussed. That was not maintenance. Around 12:40, I opened my laptop and logged into the county property portal. Public records. Boring stuff most people never touch. Parcel maps. Easements. Recorded agreements. HOA declarations. I typed in Lakewood Shores Community Association and started reading. 20 minutes later I sat back and rubbed my eyes. Exterior standards. Shared shoreline maintenance. Dock appearance requirements. Seasonal notices. Nothing unusual. Then I found amendment history. That was interesting. 3 revisions in 4 years. 1 added community appearance initiatives. Another created seasonal review authority. The newest one introduced language called occupancy optimization consultation. Consultation. Not access. Not inspection. Consultation. Yet somehow people have been walking through houses. I opened another document. Meeting summaries. Most residents never read these things. Page after page of attendance notes and budget approvals. Then one line caught my eye. Community Asset Activation Pilot approved by board vote. No details attached. Asset activation. Same language again. I leaned back and stared at the screen. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. A man's voice. Mid-60s maybe. Careful tone. Mr. Mercer? I said yes. Long pause. Then he said, you probably do not know me. My name is Richard Hall. Cabin 17. I recognized the name vaguely from old dues lists. He sounded nervous. Victoria visited your place today. Not a question. I asked how he knew. Another pause. Then he gave a small laugh, without humor. People notice white SUVs. I waited. He lowered his voice. Listen, I should not be calling. Whenever somebody starts with that, they already decided to call. He continued. Did she give you forms? I said maybe. Silence. Then he said quietly, do not sign anything. I asked why. Another silence. Finally he said, 3 years ago my wife and I joined one of the community access programs. I wrote the phrase down. He kept talking. Slow. Careful. Started small. Property review. Seasonal recommendations. Doc sharing discussions. He stopped again. Then suddenly there were meetings. Usage expectations. Suggestions that empty properties should support community goals. His voice changed slightly when he said support. I asked what happened. He laughed once. We stopped going to the cabin. I looked at the dark window over the sink. You sold. Another pause. Eventually. Then silence. I asked if anything illegal happened. He answered immediately. Nothing anybody could point at. That sentence stayed with me. Nothing anybody could point at. Before hanging up, he said one last thing. You seem quiet. That helps. People push harder when they think you will not push back. Then the line disconnected. I sat there for a long time listening to refrigerator hum and lake water outside. Asset activation. Occupancy optimization. Community access. Same words. Different shapes. I opened the recordings again and went back to the second visit. This time I watched longer. Victoria stood near my dining table, speaking to one of the women she brought. The woman pointed toward the lake and nodded. Victoria smiled and tapped her folder. Then she said something the camera could not clearly capture. I enhanced the audio slightly. Not enough for perfect sound. Just enough. Static. Wind. Then a sentence. Crystal clear. He barely uses it. Nobody answered. Victoria continued. This one could work. I paused the screen and sat completely still. Not because I was shocked anymore. Because suddenly I understood the yellow mark beside my address. I woke up before sunrise even though I barely slept. The cabin felt different now. Not unsafe. Observed. Morning light came through the lake windows in pale blue stripes, and for a second I remembered being 16 years old sleeping on that same couch while Dad made coffee before fishing. Back then mornings here meant possibility. This morning smelled like cedar, cold air, and unfinished business. I made coffee the same way Dad did. Cheap grounds. Too strong. Enamel mug. Then I sat at the dining table with my notebook and started building a timeline. Not as a police officer. Just as somebody who wanted to understand what actually happened before deciding what it meant. Dates. Visits. Documents. Phrases. Asset activation. Seasonal optimization. Community participation. The more I wrote, the stranger it looked. Everything stayed 1 inch inside normal. No obvious threats. No direct demands. No broken laws on paper. Just enough pressure to make people cooperate. Around 8:30 I drove into town. Not the station. Not yet. I stopped at a small diner 10 minutes from the lake. Place smelled like bacon, burnt toast, and coffee that had been sitting since dawn. Same waitress every year. Same laminated menus. I picked a booth by the window and opened my laptop. County records first. Then public meeting summaries. Then archived HOA newsletters. Most people never read newsletters. They should. People hide their priorities in cheerful language. 3 years ago, the association started talking about community engagement. Then shared shoreline experiences. Then maximizing seasonal value. Then preserving active ownership. Each year, the wording got more polished and slightly less specific. One newsletter had photos from a pilot program. Residents gathered on docks. Community events. One image stopped me. Small caption. Thank you to participating seasonal owners. I zoomed in. Cabin in the background. Not mine, but familiar. I opened property records. Sold 8 months later. New owner connected to an address in town. I checked another. Similar timeline. Community participation. Property transfer. Another. Same pattern. My coffee went cold. I still did not know if anything illegal happened. But I knew one thing. This was organized. I kept digging. Then I found something unexpected. Meeting minutes from 18 months ago. Buried halfway down. Proposal denied. Seasonal Property Access Initiative. Reason for denial. Exceeds governing authority. I read it again. Denied. Yet somehow visits kept happening. I took a photo of the screen. Interesting. Very interesting. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Different voice this time. Woman. Older. Calm. You are Ethan Mercer? I said yes. She hesitated. I heard Richard called you. Small communities move fast. I asked who she was. Linda Carver. Cabin 22. She took a breath. Do not trust forms that say voluntary review. I asked if she participated. Long silence. Then she said, I thought it was neighborly. Her voice stayed calm, but quieter now. Then suddenly there were recommendations. I wrote that word down. Recommendations. She continued. Move furniture. Open dock hours. Join events. Then conversations about making and used spaces available. I asked if she agreed. She laughed softly. Nobody forces you. They just make staying independent feel inconvenient. That sentence sat with me. She kept talking. Fees. Notices. Invitations. Social pressure. Nothing dramatic. Just enough friction to wear people down. Before hanging up, she said something else. People think if nobody yells, then nothing wrong is happening. Then she disconnected. I sat in the diner staring at my notes. Nobody yelled. Nobody threatened. Nobody broke doors. They walked in smiling. They handed people forms. They called it participation. I drove back to the cabin slowly. Windows down. Cold air. Pine smell. Water visible through the trees. When I pulled into the driveway, something immediately caught my eye. A white envelope taped neatly to my front door. HOA letterhead. Follow-up review notice. Scheduled community meeting. Attendance strongly encouraged. Attached to the notice was a yellow sticker. Seasonal property status. Pending. I stared at it for a second and laughed quietly to myself. Because after 13 years in law enforcement, I had learned one thing. People who think nobody checks their process eventually stop hiding the process. I peeled the yellow sticker off the door slowly and held it between my fingers. Thin paper. Cheap adhesive. Bright color. Somebody had designed that thing to feel official. Funny how often authority starts with stationery. I carried it inside and laid it next to my notebook. Seasonal property status. Pending. No explanation. No criteria. Just a label waiting for meaning. I made another cup of coffee and sat down. Then I finally did something I had intentionally avoided. I opened my work laptop. Not because I wanted to pull rank. Not because I planned to scare anyone. I just wanted to stop guessing. There is a difference between feeling something is wrong and understanding exactly where the line is. I logged into public reference systems and started separating community rules from actual property rules. Exterior authority. Common area authority. Voluntary agreements. Interior access. I already knew most of it from experience, but I wanted to read every word anyway. 40 minutes later, I leaned back and stared at the screen. Nothing complicated. Nothing hidden. No authority to enter private residences without permission. No authority to conduct interior reviews. No authority to classify usage of private homes for access programs. What existed was recommendation language. Optional participation. Community outreach. Somewhere between recommendation and reality, somebody had built their own system. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered. Young male voice this time. Nervous. Mr. Mercer? I said yes. Long silence. Then he said quietly, I worked one of those visits. I did not say anything. He continued. I should not be calling. Same sentence again. Different person. He introduced himself as Tyler. Temporary HOA support staff. College student. He sounded embarrassed more than afraid. I asked him one question. What did you think you were doing? He exhaled slowly. Honestly, I thought we were documenting underused properties for community planning. Community planning. Another polished phrase. I asked if owners knew. Long pause. Usually not. I wrote that down. He continued carefully. Victoria said direct contact created resistance. I stayed quiet. Tyler kept talking. Once people received enough notices or enough invitations, they became more cooperative. Some joined programs. Some sold. Some started coming more often. I asked if there was ever permission to enter. Another silence. Then he said something interesting. She always said if doors were unlocked or access existed through community authority, it counted. Community authority. There it was again. A phrase with no edges. Before hanging up, he said one last thing. She really believes she is helping. I thanked him and ended the call. I sat quietly for a while after that. The lake outside looked exactly the same. water moving, sun climbing, dock sitting where it always had. Nature never cares about committees. Then I looked at the envelope again. Community meeting. Attendance strongly encouraged. I checked the time. Tomorrow evening. I smiled a little, because suddenly everything made sense. The visits, the labels, the forms, the yellow category. They expected owners to defend themselves emotionally, to argue, to explain why memories mattered. But emotion was not the only language I spoke. I walked into the hallway and stopped in front of the old mirror my father hung years ago. Same face, same flannel, same boots. Nobody looking at me would think twice. That was fine. I opened a closet and pulled out a small black case. Nothing dramatic. Inside sat my department identification, neatly stored where it always stayed when I came here. Not hidden, just separate. Cabin life and work life. I looked at the badge for a second and closed the case again. Not yet. The point was never to surprise people. The point was to understand first. I carried the case back to the table and placed it beside the yellow notice. Then I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence under everything else. If people believe process protects them, start with the process. Evening light began reflecting across the lake again, and the cabin felt different now. Not violated. Not watched. Clear. Because tomorrow I was going to attend a community meeting as exactly who Victoria thought I was. Quiet owner. Seasonal resident. Cooperative neighbor. And I was curious to see what people say when they think nobody in the room understands the difference between policy and permission.